7 o'clock on the dot and get started. Thank you everyone for coming this evening. This is our Thursday night speaker series presented by the Wyoming State Archives. If you haven't signed in when you came in, please take a minute before you leave and sign in. Help yourself to the water and the snacks in the back. Take a moment and silence your phones, please. We have participants viewing this evening remotely, some possibly from China. And this is via our Eventbrite invitation that was sent out. A question and answer session will be held at the end of the program for both the remote participants and the participants here in person. Also, please check out the display over here. Susie and the museum folks always put together a really nice display that goes along with the topic of the program. So beginning in 1869, the first Chinese community began to emerge in Evanston, Wyoming. Shortly thereafter, it was Almy, then Rock Springs witnessed the emergence of Chinatowns. Most of the immigrants came from the Guangdong Province near Pearl River Delta and shared much in terms of tradition and culture. They excuse me. They spoke Taishanese. Taishanese. Celebrated traditional holidays in much the same way and venerated their ancestors in similar fashion. All of this occurred in the high desert communities of southwestern Wyoming. This presentation briefly outlines the daily activities and lives of the individuals provides a historical context describing how these immigrants not only lived but thrived in Wyoming. Our presenter this evening is Dr. Dudley Gardner, PhD Professor Emeritus from Western Wyoming College. He has published several books and articles on Wyoming history and wrote his doctoral dissertation on Chinese in Wyoming, Alberta, British Columbia, and Montana. He is currently finishing up a book titled Jade Snow, A History of the Chinese in Wyoming, 1869 to 1937. As an archaeologist and historian, he tries to weave together what has been found in excavations with historical accounts to create a narrative about day-to-day lives of what people in Wyoming. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gardner.
I'm from Rock Springs, and most people have seen the rocks, but never the springs. But there are springs there, so you should go check it out. And I don't work for the Chamber of Commerce, but I do want to say this. I started studying the Chinese in 1972, and it's kind of interesting. My two major interests were First Nations, Native Americans, and then Chinese. And part of the reason I became so interested in Chinese is that I was raised in Colorado. That's a square state south of you. And that's and so I was raised in Colorado, and I'd never seen the ocean. And I won the lottery. I've never gambled and played the lottery since because I was drafted, and I figured can't win a lottery twice. So you know the statistics. So anyway, I went to Southeast Asia. I got off the ship in the Philippines. And there were a lot of Chinese in the Philippines, and I could not speak the language. I'd never been on the water. I'd never been on a ship, and everything was strange to me. Well, to make a long story short, I spent 22 months in Southeast Asia on the ship, and what I came to comprehend is I had no idea what they were telling me, and it was time to understand what people were telling me. And the people that came to Wyoming via the way that they came to San Francisco and et cetera like this, did the same thing that I did, but in reverse. Very few of them had ever crossed the Pacific. And crossing the Pacific is different than crossing it in a plane, because I've done both now. And out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the waves are huge, and they break over the top of the ship. I was on an aircraft carrier and destroyer, the waves that break over the top of the ship. And it's very exciting. And the Chinese people face that coming this way. And I got to thinking, the middle ground between the two of us is that big ocean. And that I need to spend time trying to figure things out. I did my master's thesis on the Cherokee, and I was placed to write my doctoral dissertation on the Native American topic. But this is what I chose to do. And when I first came to Wyoming in 1981, found out about the Chinese in Rock Springs and spent ever since that time working on it. And other things too. I mean, you can't do one job in Wyoming. There's not many of us, and so you got to do everything, including taking out the garbage and everything else. So the archives people have been very nice. Robin, Susie, and Carl, who I went to school with, but we crossed. He graduated after. He's a lot younger than me. We went to the same school, but the Wyoming State Archives is wonderful. Given the limited resources that they have, the limited dollars and cents that they have, they do an incredible thing. And if you doubt that, go online and look up Wyoming newspapers. When there's any topic prior to 1920, there's just not been enough money. But what has made things different is the availability that are in the archives, because Carl and Robin and Susan catalog it so well, the availability of really, really obscure pieces of archival material that you can begin to piece the lives together of the Chinese. Add to that the archaeology, which I'm trained archaeologist. Add to that the archaeology, and you begin to get a glimpse into the life backwards. Someone in here said when that the people spoke Cantonese. Yes, but they had to speak Taishanese because that's where they were from. So where I'm going to look at is from Taishan, Wyoming, 1869 to 1932. My slides are too big. I'll try to get it so that it's right. So Taishan is located on the Pearl River Delta, and the manufacturing of ceramics and the arts that are produced in this area are phenomenal. But if you want to look at a bigger dichotomy than what you've got between Taishan and Wyoming, it's very hard to find. Taishan is verdun, it has the monsoon rains, it almost rains constantly, it's wet. The thing that impressed me most about Vietnam is you could put on a raincoat and you would be wetter inside the raincoat than out of it because you get sweat so much. It's very hot. It's a hot rain. And what that boils down to is almost anything can grow here. So the Chinese came from this location, and I've gone here subsequently, visited this place. They came from this location in southern China called Taishan. They were rice farmers. They would farm anything else, grow multiple crops. They relied heavily on animal products like pig and other items, goats, and a variety of items, especially fish. Now, I always show this because if you walk from Taishan to Evanston, it's a long walk. Thanks to geologists and thanks to Noah, we could take off the water and you can see what distance it is. Point is if you almost couldn't go further across the world than to go here. My friends in China, I have taught in China. My friends in China said if you dig far enough, you'll end up in America. So you almost are on the antithesis side of the world. If I refer to Mongolia, I've worked in Mongolia also. Where I work in Mongolia is right up there off Lake Baikal, just outside the Russian border. And it's intriguing what Asia has, how big Asia is. I mean, we have a big continent here, but nothing like Asia. If you consider three of the largest countries in the world are in Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, China. You just think of that in those terms. You understand how vast the area is and how diverse it is. Arid regions in the west make it so that only about 1/4 of Taishan not Taishan, China, is arable, but you can grow crops. And the Chinese became very adept at it, probably as soon as 10,000 years ago, at least by 6,000 years ago, when Bampo village and some of the other villages are there. So agriculture emerges very early on in this area. This is Vietnam, this is Indonesia, Thailand, and right here is Hong Kong. I'll show you that in just a second. The majority of those leaving for North America came from the region called Siyu, and Chinese is four hunting Hubao. I wish I could speak it better, but I did not. Or the 4 counties in southwest of Guangzhou in the Pearl River Delta region. The 4 counties of Xinyu, Taishan, Yinping, and Kaifeng provided the lion's share of the Chinese immigrants to the New World. I'll come back and discuss this a little bit more when I talk about the burials in Rock Springs. Okay, on this map of China, you can see where Hong Kong is and Macau, and this is the province of Guangzhou. The Pearl River Delta is like the Mississippi Delta, and that's why both the Portuguese and both the British settled and ran trade at the Pearl River Delta. It has one of the best harbors in the world. You could transport goods around the world real easy, and that was real important. In American history, if you want an equivalent, the British invaded New Orleans because they wanted to set up the same thing that was Hong Kong in the New World. If the War of 1812, they fought that battle, as you know. I've got a history degree, so I remember these things. In 1815, after the war was over, the Treaty of Ghent was signed, and they fought the Battle of New Orleans afterwards. So you see, texting is good because if they could text, they said the war is over. They could have stopped and said about it. Trouble. But the point being is, this is a commercial area. The same thing at the Mississippi Delta. At one time, I heard that New Orleans had the highest amount of freight shipped out of any place in the United States. People argue about that. There's places in Texas that think they ship more. There's places in California, Long Beach say the same thing. But this is the case in southern China. Hong Kong is where most manufactured goods come from via container and from Canton and Taishan. This is the Pearl River Delta. And again, I'm showing this to contrast what they had in Wyoming. Macau was the first place that Europeans settled, and they were Portuguese. And they built a city at Macau, and they traded goods with the Chinese. The most valuable thing that they could trade to Europeans were spices. Spices is not the big thing. Ceramics, and also tea and silk. Silk becomes real important. The tea time became really important for the survival of the British. Just so you know, that you guys know this. But you can see the estuary. This is the Pearl River estuary. This is Macau. This is Hong Kong. Taishan sits over here, just to the northwest of Macau. And again, you can see the topography here. The Leos who came to the New World, came to Wyoming, came from Shubei village in Taishan. Of the 731 Chinese living in Rock Springs in 1885, 42% were Leos. What this amounts to is the cousins and relatives that came from one village inside of southern China, Taishan, Taishan City, from Taishan, came to Rock Springs and came to southwest Wyoming. The reason is that you could write home and say, there's jobs in Wyoming. There's places that you can come and get employment. And a man by the name of WSA, who I'll mention in just a moment, was the person who provided that in-between world where he would help recruit workers to come to Wyoming. But it's amazing how many people came to Wyoming. I one time thought that all the people came from Taishan. They all came from Guangzhou and they all came from surrounding counties. But the number that came from Taishan, when I was introduced to it, were high. And until we were able to tease out the data, until we were able to spend a lot of time drilling down into it, until we were able to interview quite a few people, the Liaos were the ones that we knew came, but we thought everybody came from Taishan. Not quite. These are the counties in Guangdong Province that produce. These are the counties in Guangdong Province that produce most of the overseas Chinese. The dark red is where Taishan is located at. And that's where the individuals came from here, the Sandy counties, the 4 counties. Sandy. That dark red area is the place that produced most of the immigrants to Wyoming. This is the village that they came from, Shubei. You can see the type of houses that they had, and you can see where that yellow circle is around where this is located. I think I've got a better map. All right. So they came from Shubei village, and they came to Wyoming to when. So here's a chronology of when they came. 1869 to 1874, Chinese immigrants were recruited to work in western Wyoming on the railroad and in western coal mines. Sorry, I just skirted over this, but I have a lot of things that I want to do because this fact that they came from one locality is really important in the development of Wyoming. It's really important in the development of southwestern Wyoming. From 1869, Ase Leo Wing arrives. He's from Taishan, the Taishan area, make the Taishan city Shubei village. He brings his cousins, he recruits for Beckwith and Quinn, and he becomes the jobber for the Union Pacific Coal Company, anybody else that wants to employ Chinese. He arrives in 1869, shortly after the completion of Transcontinental Railroad, and he goes directly to Evanston, and he becomes well established. He's a generous man, he's trusted. This is real important because of what transpires over the next 40 years. He's basically close to 40 years before he passes away. It's 30 years. He passes away in 1899. From 1874 to 1875, Rock Springs Chinatown is constructed by Union Pacific Railroad Company as part of a contract between Beckwith and Quinn and Union Pacific. Beckwith and Quinn Company and it was into a contract with the Union Pacific. But this is the Wild West. Equity Queen is not an officially registered company. As Robin and I found out, they didn't register until November of 1885 after the Chinese massacre became a company inside the state. However, you just called yourself a company, you're a company. They operated as a company, but their primary job was to provide contract labor to Union Pacific. In their contract, and I think it was negotiated by WSA, it was insisted that they would be provided with housing, and that this housing would be for the benefit of the Chinese residents coming in. It was called the company town, but it was a contractual obligation. It cut into the amount of money they made because they had to pay rent on those buildings. It was not rent-free, but it was part of the contract. They could provide with food, they could provide with a place to stay, and they would be provided with employment. And it told what they had to pay for the picks that they used, what they had to pay for the equipment. Not only do you work, when you worked in a coal mine, did you work on a contract basis where you mined the coal by ton. You paid for your tools, you paid for sharpening those tools, you paid for the food that came from a company like that company Quinn. It's September 2nd, 1885, the Chinese miner attacked Rock Springs and 28 miners were killed. I'm not going to spend so much time on that because the fact that's always discussed in Wyoming history. At another time I'll get to talk about this, but I want to talk more about the people and what they were successful at doing during that time between 1869 and 1937. The Chinatown is burned to the ground in 1885. Between September 6th and 8th, 1885, I didn't put the date, Chinese miners are returned to Rock Springs, accompanied by the U.S. Army, and the Chinatown is rebuilt by the Union Pacific. Chinatown in Rock Springs, that most people talk about, that most of the pictures are from, is the second Chinatown, and it was built in 1885. Chinatown is rebuilt quickly in less than a month. Camp Pilot Butte, the military camp, was constructed right across the street to protect the Chinese. And it stays there. This is a mistake in a lot of people's narratives and in a lot of history books. It stays there from 1885 to 1899. It's abandoned in February 1899, and the last company stationed at Camp Pilot Butte is Infantry Company I, which is an African American or Buffalo soldiers because they're infantry. And infantry were stationed there. It is abandoned after the Spanish-American War, not during the Spanish-American War, which is another thing that comes through in the written text. From 1912 to 1913, the start of the Rock Springs Chinatown began subdivided and tore down. Okay, that's poorly written and I'll explain this. From 1912 to 1913, they began to subdivide the Chinatown and sell it off for real estate. So they begin to destroy it in urban development, but it's not quite that simple. Because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Restriction Act of 1882, the numbers of Chinese coming in are diminished. There's not a replacement. People are returning home, or a lot of them are dying. There's not replacement. Chinese, what is really interesting is they're replaced by Japanese and Greek workers. Japanese begin to outnumber most other minorities in Rock Springs as far as coal miners go. They begin to enter in 1992. As the Chinese aged out, the Japanese took their place. That will be important in a moment. 1925 to 1932, retired Union Pacific Coal Company Chinese who returned to China, and Leos still remain in Rock Springs. There are still Leos living in Rock Springs that have this heritage back in Trinity Village. But Chinese immigrants were first recruited to work on the railroad and then in the coal mines in Almy and Wyoming Territory between 1869 and 1871. The photograph here is of Echo Canyon to the south. I'm going to tell you something funny in just a moment. Echo Canyon's in Utah, but we'll find out that Wyoming didn't necessarily honor the state boundaries. We'll explain that in just a moment. But they're first recruited to work on the railroad because what Union Pacific did was they got paid for every mile that they laid, and they got land for every mile that they checkable, right? So they laid it down. There was an account given by a government inspector that in some places it was just sticks laid on ground with rails put on top. They said that you can't run up and down this railroad. Well, they met a promontory. Long story there. They met a promontory. The Chinese had built the road to promontory. The Irish and others had built it in the west. What Union Pacific decided to do at that point in time was hire the Chinese workers. And people say, well, was it a point of prejudice? No, it was a point of economics because the Chinese workers had worked together so well, they were faster and laid track than anybody did. it's 12 miles of track was laid in one day. The Irish foreman, Chinese crew, they laid 12 miles. To this day, that is the most tracks laid by a crew in the history of the world by hand. 12 miles. And it's in the West Desert. So they recruited the Chinese to come and work and repair the railroad. So this basically shows the commercial and geographic relationship of New York to Europe and Asia. And this was an advertisement. When the railroad was completed, they advertised how we had been tied to, how Europe and Asia had been tied via the United States. The only way that you could go between those quickly is to take a railroad between New York City and San Francisco and get on a boat to go further. So there was advertisements put forward, and this is from Library of Congress, in which the views of Hong Kong, Honolulu, Aspinwall, Panama, and other Pacific Railroad things are shown. But basically what it's showing is that coming through the United States, New York straight line, to San Francisco was the best way to go west. Now, Almy arrives to repair those railroads. But he's smart, he's articulate, he can speak English, and he arrives in Wyoming Territory in 1869 to work on the railroads. He stays until 1899, as I said before, when he passed away. Almy was a Leo Wing gang. He, along with other Leos, came from Hubei and Taishan. And 42% of the Chinese in Rock Springs in 1885 were from Hubei. This is a picture of Almy. As you know, we are in the high desert of Western Wyoming. This map is a little bit accurate, but we have the Great Basin and we have the Upper Creek. This is desert. It's a winter desert. And it was very difficult to recruit people to come there and work. You can recruit people in Western Wyoming. You can't get them to stay. And if you've done this, I'm going to tell you one quick story. And you can't let me digress around. This will be a long night. But one quick story. When the Shoshone and the Comanche got horses, they came to southwestern Wyoming. The Shoshone went north to Alberta and the Comanche went south to Texas. Given the means of transportation, people will leave quickly. And that's what that's actually true. But they wanted to go on. This upper Colorado River Basin is high mountain district. 6,200 feet is the lowest point, and that's a Flaming Gorge. 6,200 feet is hot in the summer, it's cold in the winter and evening. Now, to repair the railroad, they put in section camps at every 6-mile intervals along the Union Pacific. In Canada, it's every 5 miles on the north of the Canadian Pacific. In Wyoming, it's every 6 miles. So they erected Washakie, Evanston, Mills, Hillard, Aspen, Piedmont, Leroy, Bridger, Carter, Hampton, Churchman, Granger, Marston, Ryan, Green River, and Rock Springs. They put up all of these stations almost overnight. Washakie was considered to be part of Wyoming. How I know this is they levied taxes against these residents, and they paid poll taxes to Evanston. And this is in the archive. You can take a look at it. But Wasatch, for at least the first 10 years, paid taxes to Wyoming. Now, you got to survey your property. This shows in 1873 the number of Chinese that are living in each one of these areas. Now, the Almy gang at Evanston, and this is important, had 15 Chinese in 1873, Wasatch, Millis, for Aspen 8. I'm going to stop at Aspen. You can see the rest of the numbers that are there. This Central Pacific Railroad did not have coal. I also wrote the history of Wyoming coal line way back in 1989. And when I did that, I researched the coal companies that were in the West that competed against Wyoming coal. Wyoming coal is the best for locomotives. Rock Springs was considered the Newcastle of the West. You couldn't find better coal. And according to Hayden, you couldn't find better coal than in Almy. So both of them had good coal. But Central Pacific did not have coal in California, Nevada, or Utah, and they needed that coal. The only other place they could get coal was from the Nanaimo out of British Columbia. That's a shipping issue for ships. So what they did was they set up their own coal mines north of the Union Pacific. As you know, Union Pacific controlled every other section. Central Pacific homesteaded or had somebody homestead those sections that were federal sections north of the railroad, and in some cases purchased from Union Pacific the right to mine coal. But 2 sets of coal companies were operated at Almy. Almy is 7 miles north of Evanston. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And at Almy, the Central Pacific began to immediately bring in Chinese. The Chinese, it was the largest Chinatown, and this is often overlooked in Wyoming until Rock Springs. Almy served Evanston, but Evanston did not have a large Chinese population. It was a service town. Almy lived there. They had a Josh house. They had Masonic Temple, Chinese Masonic Temple. They had other services inside Almy. but it was not a coal mining town. It served the railroad and the surrounding communities. That was important. It also served as a place that you could show up. You walked in from Almy to Evanston and say, I'm tired of working in the mines. Here, can I go somewhere else? They might help you get to Rock Springs later on. But by 1869 to 1873, Almy had become a principal mining spot. Chinese workers were working in this locality. So these towns are the ones that we did archaeological excavations at. This becomes important. Evanston, Aspen, the railroad section camp, Hampton, and Rock Springs. Again, here's the map showing you where these are at. Just to give you an idea. This is the 1874 township and range of Aspen. I really like this particular place. And we excavated it, and a man by the name of Ryan Kennedy analyzed our bone, and this is fascinating. What happens is that you find that actually the Chinese are eating better than are the compadres, the Irish and other people, in part because of the fact that they're taking advantage of what's on the land and they're importing things on the railroad, and they develop a Costco system. Let's just call it. They're able to accumulate a large amount of goods, and they're able to sell and redistribute. Distribute. These are the type of houses that they used at Aspen, and in the Rock Springs Chinatown, and at Evanston, and at Almy. They're 12 foot by 60 foot. And I purchased one of these houses in Rock Springs, and I did the excavation in my backyard. But these are the type of houses they have. They're segregated from the rest of the community. The Chinese have to live separate from the rest of the people in the community, and that will continue with the Japanese and the Koreans. So it wasn't just the Asians from China that came here. Later, Japanese and Koreans came to work in the mines and on the railroad. This is the Aspen section camp, and it's on private property that we have permission to work on this property. But this is a stove casing right here. We found blocks, we found ceramics, and he's pointing to ceramics there on the ground, but this is what on the surface. Now we did excavation, and just like in an archaeological report, we put this in here so you could go blind reading the thing. But we found pig, cow, deer, jackrabbit, rabbit, porcupine, badger, nested cat, small mammals, and then down here we found pack rat, mouse, chicken, ducks, unspecified birds, we think sage grouse, and then a variety of fish. That fish on the right is California sheephead. Now this is where it becomes real fascinating. These are butcher marks. They ate porcupines, they ate badgers, and because it's available. I mean, why pass over meal? In doing archaeological work in the Pleistocene site that we've excavated in Colorado, site that I was a director on, we found all kinds of rabbit. Okay, so you're supposed to go out on a mammoth hunt, right? Because you live in the Pleistocene. You walk up to your rabbit and say, wait, I'm hungry. I'll kill this rabbit. And you kill what's available. Anybody everywhere does this because the fact that it's available. And you import these, the sand dog, the Sacramento perch, and flounder. Okay, so I'm gonna come back to this in a minute. So the Almy, which was settled to the north, we have not done archaeological excavations, and it's one of the bigger mysteries. When I talk about Chinese massacre in a minute, it's real important that you understand what happens to the Chinese in Almy. These are the mines, and this is an old map, and this is very hard to find maps. This Rocky Mountain Coal Company, this UP mines, the UPC mines, these right here are associated with Central Pacific Railroad and with the Union Pacific to a degree. Excuse me. Okay, Almy, where this section was located at, this is an old map. Almy has got it divided out as to where these areas are located at, where the mine sites are located. I have to step forward here. These sections here, oh yeah, this is number 2 mine, this is number 1, that's number 3. This is number 1 mine, number 2 mine, number 4. Keep this in mind, you'll see a picture of number 4 in just a moment. So these are put in place in 1869. This is an 1871 map. This is a list of the people off of the assessor's record in 1872 that are Chinese living inside of Evanston. You can see this. So gang number 5, number 3 has 23 Chinese, 10, 11. I'm not going to read all these, but you can see how many Chinese are in Almy by 1873. This is the number 4 mine that I just showed you on that map. And these are the houses that were built for the residents inside of Almy. Now, the Chinese residents were removed. in 1885. And in 1881, the mine number three, mine number three exploded at Almy, and it killed 39 Chinese. That's the first mine explosion west of the Mississippi. It killed 39 Chinese. This is a little bit distorted, but I'll paraphrase what it is, and you can read as I paraphrase it. But that mine had been on fire for 5 years, in part because the engineers, the mining engineers, didn't quite understand coal mining. They didn't understand the problem with methane inside of that mine shaft. And what happened is it exploded and killed those 39 Chinese. There were other nationalities killed, but primarily the people killed in that mine explosion in 1881, March 3rd, I believe it was, killed were Chinese. Okay. This is Evanston, Chinatown. Now, a lot of these people moved to Evanston and then went to work in Rock Springs because the Rock Springs mines were safer. Rock Springs mines were opened in 1868. The Chinese didn't begin to enter those mines until 1873 in large number. The Evanston Chinatown is laid out very systematically. It's laid out between the bows or the oxbow on the Bear River. And I've got to be careful not to touch it because I've learned I make mistakes. Here you have a grist mill. Here you have an electric company. These are later additions, the ones in pink. But this town stayed just exactly like this in a well laid out configuration all the way up till the turn of the century. Here are the houses right here. Here is the Josh house, and here is the Masonic temple. And Osei built a house right beside it because he had enough money. Chinese owned property in Evanston. They not only owned property, Osei was able to vote. There's a lot of twists and turns to what happens. Not only are they able to vote, they're able to have intermarriages inside of Evanston. In fact, people came from California to be married in Evanston if they wanted to have an interracial marriage. So they would come to Evanston and have a marriage. In 1913, when it was outlawed, Wyoming being Wyoming, they didn't fine you for marrying somebody. They fined preaching. So it's a picture and it has the piece they very kind of put the kibosh on you, but that comes a little bit later. Okay. In addition to this, Evanston Chinatown is kind of rich. They have a lot of swine, and they pass pig ordinance. Now, just so you think that it's not unique to Evanston, they pass pig ordinances in Rock Springs and other cities in Wyoming. And one of the big complaints was that free-ranging pigs were causing literally this throughout town, and so they complained about it. But the law, even though you saw that law in 1882, that law had little effect because in 1885, you can see the swine numbers in this. I'm sorry, it's 42, and it's reported on the assay book about how many swine they have. And in the archaeological record, we find they have a lot of swine. This shows that they paid poll tax in 1885. That's where the big surprise came to be. We don't have census records that are accurate. We don't have anything else. But death and taxes are inevitable. The first Chinese that came into Wyoming paid poll taxes. People like Carter, and it's in the newspaper, were behind in paying their poll taxes, not the Chinese. The Chinese paid on time, and they paid regular $1. And it was an ordinance for everybody. There was no exception to that. Everybody had to pay that $1. So everybody paid that $1. Through our excavations, I'm not going to focus on the ones in California, but you can compare with California. Through our excavations, we found out how many pigs we had just in a small area. The Aspen section camp, which had a very small population, had 19 pigs represented in the assemblage. We had chickens, we had cattle, and caprins or sheep. And the only place we had sheep was in Rock Springs. But you can see that each town, they processed pigs, and this is through the archaeological record. And we can tell where they came from because by doing isotopic studies, we could tell what food they ate. And we know that most of the pigs in Evanston and Rock Springs were fed with corn. Now that a little bit troubles me a bit because I would think that you would have them as free ranging, but they're fed by corn. The reason why, according to Kennedy, is because of the fact that corn could be easily shipped by railroad cars to these towns, and it was they fattened up faster. So they had access to it. Okay, so I'm going to go through the Aspen section camp in the Rock Springs Chinatowns and look at what they ate. And this is Ryan Kennedy did this work for us. We excavated. So in doing the zooarchaeology, this is the variety of fish that they ate going through the town. And some are pickled, some are pickled, some are salted, but this is the type of fish. Yeah, Sacramento perch, Sacramento blackfish, suckers, rockfishes, California sheephead is real important, but that's not the limits of it. We have Sacramento pike minnow, which is really important in the diet. And we know where that comes from in the Sacramento area to this day. When you see that brown on that map in California, that's where the Sacramento pike minnow comes from. And it's in our assemblage. We find a lot of it. In other words, they have a diverse diet. Rock Springs Chinatown had striped bass and rockfish, Sacramento perch, spotted sea trout, and sand sea trout from the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this is a little bit later, but they're shipping fish all the way from the Caribbean to Rock Springs so that they have a diversity in the amount of fish that they have for fish that they're eating in these communities. Okay, the staple isotopes of pigs and chickens were measured so that we could tell what kind of food that they were eating. So Ryan Kennedy did it with pigs and chickens. The excavations are Western Wyoming College's Western Archaeological Research Institution. There are excavations, but Ryan Kennedy did the research for his dissertation and for his publication right here. So the stable isotopes and the results of the analysis, corn-fed pigs are much more common in Wyoming sites. That ain't because we grow more corn in southwestern Wyoming. That's not the reason. Okay, most pigs are locally raised with little corn input in other places, but not Evanston and Rock Springs. Corn fed for chickens in both Wyoming and California. So they were feeding them corn in both Wyoming and California. In other words, they had an elaborate shipping system that was there. Now, because archaeologists want to show you that they dig in squares, where you see that red square there is where we found the butchery shop and the restaurant and the laundry and the jewelry shop. So with inside of Chinatown, we found this elaborate advanced system had evolved. This is 1895 in Evanston. It shows you those tight structures that you see right there, and that's where we concentrated our excavations. This is 1906 Evanston, and you can see that it begins to demise, and they built a Japanese town on top of it. This is a picture of it falling down. You see all that brick in the center there? There was an ordinance passed in Evanston that you could not have a laundry unless it was out of brick. So you had to pay stone. They had to build stone laundries. The reason is that the Chinese were so effective with laundries that they were simply wrapping it up business. Honest Pete, but nobody else. It was not something to be compete. Oh, I think I want to move on. It was quite profitable. This is our excavation stand in Evanston. This shows the area that we excavated. Now I'm going to show you some. Yes. I'm going to show you some of the. How do I?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh, that's
This first time, this first time I've ever operated one of these machines. I really like it. I've been used to it.
she's very helpful.
This is a teacup and this is painted. Now we just got one out of excavation the other day, like this too. But this is a teacup. Evanston. This is a white mouth jar. This is the double lock that's used to seal it. This is the lid off of that jar right there. This is the decoration on one of the soup bowls or larger bowls. These are the type of storage vessels that we found in Evanston, Chinatown. We found wine bottles, one on the left and on the right. And then wide mouth that you could put pickles or something else in there. We're not going to say what the contents are, but I will say this. The jar is not important. It's what's inside the jar that's important. We get caught up sometimes looking at the jars with the pits and we remember what's inside it is the most significant thing that we can find archaeologically. Oh, I did it. This is the variety of jars that we got. The one on the far right, this shows you how you learn as you go. We thought it was a teapot, soy pot. It's for holding soy. And again, what I said is analyze the interior of it and what you got, and another same thing. So this is the variety of vessels that we got at Evanston in this case. Now, what is in the vessel is important. And we know for a fact by the analysis that they have ginger, soy, and alcohol, possibly wine. But they had alcohol inside those vessels. So it's not just the size of it, it's what we found inside the vessels. It gave us those dates. In terms of food that we found, they were cultivating and running gardens in Evanston. Back in 1885, there were 3 gardeners in Evanston, and they were selling their goods in extra produce inside of town. The fresh vegetables were real important, and they learned real quick on what they could grow. So squash and pumpkin would grow, and strawberries would grow, but not all in Hawthorne. That was important. You have night scale, you have peppers and tomatoes. They probably grew some tomatoes here, I think, that they can eat. But the grapes and other stuff are important. This we found in archaeological excavation through analysis of the material we found inside of Evanston. Evanston had its distinctions because of the fact that it was so tightly built. It was an elaborate community and it served a wide area. It had a good source of water in the form of the Bear River, but its elevation in 6749 and latitude made it hard to grow things. So what the Chinese did was focus on miners, lettuce, and other things that would grow at a high elevation short growing seasons. This is the Chong ditch. This is important because not only did this person put the ditch in, he owned the property that he put this on. This is this was put in the pre-territorial period, I believe, and therefore the water was not owned by the state just at that time, and so it wasn't adjudicated. He had to go through the county to get the water adjudicated. Now we're going to move to Rock Springs, which was actually the largest, longest lived town inside of Wyoming. It began in 1873, and this was the Leo family in the turn of the century. We have very good pictures from the 1890s of the Chinese community. And if you look at this, they're commingled with military troops in their inside Chinatown celebrating the Chinese New Year. But you can see the military hats, and it becomes quite a mixed town. Rock Springs post 1885 is very diverse. Union Pacific made it a policy to not hire anybody from the same country. They asked the person, for example, Italian, how many neighbors do you have that are Italian? Say X, Y, Z. Let's say, well, we'll be someplace else. They did not want the union to form. D.O. Clark was very specific about this. The Chinese massacre that brought these troops in 1885 caused three things. Number one, because it was the Knights of Labor that pressed for the Chinese to be removed, they acceded to some of the things that they did. In 1885, they drove the Chinese out of Hong Kong. Never returned. Never returned. They moved to Evanston. They drove out the Chinese in Rock Springs, and the Chinese were going to be sent to Carbon, but because of the resistance against Chinese labor, they were not. Negotiations that followed the 1885 Chinese massacre are pretty intriguing. Number one is the Union Pacific said we will not put people back in Almy because CPR, Central Pacific Railroad, that brought in, we're not relying upon. And records that we've got that Robin and I have found inside of our practice shows that Almy becomes a very good child settlement. And so there's a really intriguing thing happening inside Almy. But they're driven out, and that's in September of 1885. That policy, that thing of driving people out of the town and not letting them come back, was what they did in Tacoma, Washington in November of 1885. And it was again the Knights of Labor. The Union Pacific did not put Chinese inside of Carbon, but they said to the Union, you guys go. You guys leave. You killed these people, you burned their house, you stole their money. And the charges against those that were arrested were arson, riot, murder, robbery, 4 charges. And those people were enriched. You can find that in the tax records. Everybody has to pay taxes. And the sheriff wants to collect his money. So Sheriff Young made sure that his salary was paid and he got that from taxes. So there were assessments made in 1886 that showed that these people, these miners, that had hardly 2 dimes left to them. It was a sudden rich in 1886. How does that happen? Robbery. So they hid the crime. But what Union Pacific said is the people who rioted would not come back. The military was stationed in Rock Springs. This was again. And then they ended the policy, which I started to tell right here, of bringing in people from all multiple nationalities. So you get diversity in Rock Springs, and you get the site we have in Rock Springs, home of 56 nationalities, occurs after the Chinese massacre. And they begin to actively recruit from the southern part of Europe and get all over, wherever they could get them to recruit. In time, Slovenians begin to dominate, but not initially. We'll talk about that in just one more second. This is Chinatown, and this is a banner. And initially we thought this says Happy New Year, but it doesn't. it says this is to commemorate our ancestors in Taishan. So that banner talks about it. Another one says death to the Qing, which shows the revolutionary concepts they had. They were sending money back home for the revolution. Okay. In 1874, a man from Taishan named Leo Chung came to work in the coal mines in Rock Springs. He would live in Rock Springs for 41 years. He came from what is listed as Sin Ming Province. Sin Ming probably meant Sun Ming Taishan's former name, and on his employment record. As I said, over 40% of the people were from this province. He stayed in Rock Springs. He was shot in the back, and they couldn't remove the bullet. He lived in Rock Springs with people that had shot him for some period of time. He stayed. In fact, we know that over 200 people that were in the massacre that stayed over a long period of time. Not sure how we know that.
That's great.
I'll explain how we know that. Okay, this is number 5 mine. And this is Chinatown in Forestburg. Next slide. This is an 1883 map of the Chinatown. This is the one that's burned. So this Chinatown, this is the main part of town right here. We know how they're configured. Inside of those households, in this case, there were 10 individuals in house 10, and there was a cook, a laborer, coal miners. So we know from the census records how they ordered themselves inside this household. It makes good sense to have a cook. There's not somebody to cook for you when you come home. So because of the fact that I showed you how diverse their diet was and how important diet was to them, they had a cook at home that was preparing. Food had to be fresh. They couldn't have it in the refrigerators. They paid the cook to cook. The thing that was not too far for them to go from was either to be laundered for other miners or cook for other people or provide lunches for other miners within this other community. This group of people, a lot of them left. Now, the names are a little bit different than the Leos, but they are related. This is the 1883 Chinatown right here. That's the one that's burned. This is what it looked like before 1885. This is housing pre-1885. And this, the new Chinatown emerges that September. I've got to figure this out. Okay. This is what it looks like in the 1890s, where we had the most of the photographs. These are the smokestacks for number 1 mine. And this is the number of people that were killed in the mines after that period of time. Note the date of death. These people died one at a time in rockfall inside the Sweetwater County mines. These are the mines that they work at. And so they're staying in harsh conditions, but they stay. They stay in Rock Springs. The environment is not the best, but they stay. They have a cemetery to the north of town, which is very difficult to locate. And they venerated the dead, and they sent the dead back home. This is the Rock Springs Chinese Cemetery. This is one of the crypts that were opened up at a later point in time because the bones were sent back to China. These are the markers on the graves. And this is important because we have these translated. So Taishan or Taishan is the names on the graves. So we're beginning to get triangulation on some of these places. The names, the carvings, the engravings. We begin to get triangulation on knowing where the Chinese came from. This is the new Chinatown in 1896. Look how many houses that they've got in this particular case. So the rebuild is pretty impressive. They have a mission house. And that's why we have so many pictures from the 1890s. In 1896, a missionary came and took photographs of Chinatown, and he recorded it. There is a Josh house inside of town where they venerated their ancestors and they worshiped their gods the way that they wanted to. In the burning of the Chinatown in 1885, there were at least 4 men who had come to the Josh house for protection by the ancestors were shot in or outside the Josh house. They're trying to find protection in their home. The new Chinatown in 1896 sets a house a little bit far apart, and they were told they could not build basements. That did not. Because the smart money is to get out of the wind and take and put the dirt up on the side of your house so that you have insulation. But this shows how robust the Chinatown became. This is an 1896 photograph after this period of time. This is another photograph of the crowd. This is a resident near Chinatown or his home in Rock Springs. This is Chinatown in 1908. When USGS begins to dwindle. New Chinese can't come, the old Chinese died, they've never been replaced. And in 1892, they began to recruit Japanese to the point that there were more Japanese miners than Chinese miners in 1908. This is the Chinatown, where these houses are pointing out. You can see how small it becomes. And this is in 1903, a little bit later. This is the mission house enlarged. And this is something that's really important. 1907, they went out on a strike. Everybody walked out of the colony coal plants out of New York City. They went on strike. They did this in May. In May, this is June. They did this in May. They told the Chinese miners and the Japanese miners to go down into number 1 and work, and they were protected. Now, during the Chinese massacre, the Chinese that weren't attacked found safety in 1909. So those people that went back in there, that they had survived that, knew that they could survive in 1901 if there was another massacre because they're on strike and they didn't join the union. It wasn't that they didn't want to join the union. There was no translator. So the miners union, the United Mine Workers, decided what they would do is say, you know what? We can shut the Union Pacific down. Let's admit Japanese and Chinese. What they did not know is because the same problem that I've got with language, not necessarily even understanding English very well. They had not talked to these Japanese miners and said, where do you come from? They came from Cocoa and Hiroshima. And we know this because of burials that they were translating the burials. They came from Cocoa. Where they came from Cocoa was a hotbed of labor resistance inside of Japan. What they brought in the United States were people that believed the union was really important to have. So when they said, what are the white miners doing this? They got on strike. Let's go. And because of that, in 1907, United Mine Workers, Rock Springs, were the first place that they admit Asians into the union. The first place, the very first place in Rock Springs. 22 years after the Chinese massacre, they joined the union. And they're Chinese and Japanese in this particular case. They were admitted into the union. Now, this is union dues paid. And down here you can see up-in, and you can see there's also a Japanese name, Tom. But there's the dues that are being paid in the UMW in 1990. I think I'll say forgetting me. This data from American Heritage Center. In the case of the Chinatown, it slowly began to disappear. In 1912, they began to build a public school. This is kind of important. It's an integrated school. It has Chinese students and other students here, but it's a night school too. It's a precursor of Western Wyoming Community College. And why they voted for it, that to be the case, because it was a night school, provided these people with English classes and the ability to get citizenship. So in this schoolhouse, it was built right on top of Chinatown. And then they put a church here, but it was put here by the Slovenes. Remember I said that they did that, remember? So St. Cyril Methodius was built by the Slovenian immigrants here. And right up here, Slovinsky Dom was built. Down here, there was a Slovenian grocery store built. They basically replaced the Chinese because the Chinese can't get in the United States through Exclusion Act. Our 1991 excavations were at this locality right here, so we have a pretty good idea of what this house is like. By 1920 on the Sanborn map, you see that the only Chinese community left is to the north of the school. And the school is this place right here. So you begin to see this slow dwindling and diminishing of Chinatown through natural subdivision. It's not natural, but subdivision. Oh. But the remaining Chinese houses are just on the north part of town. In 1925, the Union Pacific makes a decision to pay to send home the old timers. Done by a member of the George Pryor. We have all of this communication. Prior times, we don't have it. This time we do. There's the Union Pacific Coal Mine Collection in Rock Springs. We have the entire sweep of communication between the two. And George Pride, who was a Scottish immigrant, who went to work in the coal mines at 17 in Scotland, knew what it was to be a miner. He said in his letter, he says, I'm worried about the old timers. A lot of them had black young. One of them was supposed to slave to go in 1925. I think died. You can't go in a mine more than 2 months, according to the attorneys that worked for the Pacific. They were prosecuting attorneys in Seward County. Work for the Pacific. You could not work in the mine for 2 months without having black lung. Black lung is not the coal; it's the silicates that the coal is encased in. So that sand gets in your lungs, it's what kills you. So of the people that were supposed to go back in 1925, one died before they did it. Lao Tin, the man that was shot in the back right there, went home. They paid his passage home, and gave him a lump sum payment of $300 or $500, depending on how long you get. I think it was $300, $500. As we know, we can't take out a retirement in one lump sum because the grandkids come and say, Dad, I want a new car, Granddad, I want a new car. And I say, oh, you're so cute, you look like me. Okay, I'll do this. But the point being is the lump sum payment doesn't work. George Pride, speak well of him, was getting letters from these Chinese people saying, you're not making it. One guy built a house, and the house was destroyed by boom. They sent him $10 a month. Now, there is a problem that I've got with this particular thing. The United Mine Workers went out and struck a tree. I think it was put in that they had to pay retirement. I don't think that George Pride, there's a lot of things that suggest to me that this was not his way of operating. I don't think George Pride was opposed to giving them a steady payment. But I think that there was a misunderstanding about what this was supposed to happen. When they wrote back to George Pride and said, would you send us more money? He did. The letters written back from China were translated. Ahau wrote and asked for more money. He said, things are different. I'm not making it. And we have a translation of his letter right here. I'm not going to read this out loud. It says, Mr. Pride, thank you for the $300 you gave. Thank you for sending me back home. I'm not making it. Can you send me more money? He did. He consulted and he did. So in 1926, this group that went by were sending the money. This is in San Francisco where they were at. In 1927, 4 more men returned to China. The all just means mischief. It's not their name, it just means mischief. So it's a little bit of a problem. The last 3 went home in 1932. And they were Liang, Liu Yipping, and Liu Yipping. They went home in 1932. Now understand we have these letters in Chinese that we don't get the translation from. So a kind fellow by the name of Peter Lau, the woman who earned her doctorate, the extent of her name, translated a lot of these things for us. We know, for example, that the New Grand Cafe in Rock Springs was where a lot of this communication was coming back and forth with them. Because they had to write Chinese because they couldn't write in English. So there was a lot of communication. The Chinese community continued to work together all the way through the 1920s and into the 1930s. This is Lao Chi, or Jim, just Jim. He was a favorite of the Union Pacific. And why he was a favorite, I think it's because his language is good. He did what he said, but he was over the livery barn, and he was responsible for paying money to the Chinese. So they would send the money to Liao Chi in Taishan, and here you have a letter from him. Dear sir, I have received your letter and check yesterday. And then he tells that he distributed to the other Chinese people. So the check, he took the money and distributed the money. It was supposed to be there to them. So he give that money back to them. Problem with it is, this is 1932, the problem with it is Union Pacific's corporate managers in New York City says, we can't do this. And remember, you're inside the Depression. Why they don't want to do it is because they think they have leverage against the union to stop paying resource stuff and money to them. You know what happens in 32 is Roosevelt comes to the office, changes occur, so this goes away. So McCulloch writes George Pride, tells him he's got to stop paying. And he says, as of the 24th of May, with regard to payments to the Chinese who elected to take a lump sum, I've instructed Mr. Tolliver, who is the accountant for the company in Rock Springs, to make no further payments to them and continue payments to Lao Chi hereafter. In other words, payments stopped to most of the people except Jim. That Jim received money, but that's not part of the story. According to Henry Chatty, monies would continue to be sent to China up till 1937. And for those of you that know world history, what happened in 1937? Japanese invaded China and it disrupted the rail services, even though it was coming through Hong Kong places. They couldn't get money in after 1947. In some ways, what happened to the Chinese after they left is a little bit of history, except the fact that their Leos still live in Rock Springs. Their legacy is really important. They tell us that things continue, and that people continue to live in Rock Springs and run restaurants and continue to make a difference where they live. So, what we're doing in this case is we're looking at the macro level of analysis. So we're looking at the diaspora. Then we look at mid-level analysis, where they're living, and then we look at the micro, what they ate. So I kind of reversed this. And I showed you the micro things, the small things forgot that show exactly the lives that these Chinese had. They adjusted. They lived in a high desert and lived well, considered. They saved money. One of the criticisms of it was that they did not shop locally. Well, if I had my way, I'd put an oil well in my backyard. And I would shop locally too. But, point being is you take advantage of the resources that are near at hand and you don't buy things that are shipped great distances. If you're trying to save your money to send home to your family, you're going to take advantage of what the environment gives you. That's what they give. That's rather than say we're in a high desert, things are going bad. They combine their resources together. In the case of the thing that's pooling money together, bringing shipments out or whatever, and they grew crops and they supported one another, and they were capable of making it and saving money. The idea was to extract themselves from the bank system, lending system. A lot of other miners got caught into. They're not the only one who figured this out. The Slovenians figured it out. Japanese figured it out. But the main thing you don't want to do is own your soul to the company store. The reason that those strikes were so successful in the early part of the 19th century was to get rid of the company store. I mean, it was such a problem. And it didn't work as smoothly as I'm telling you right now. There's a lot of back and forth. It took 40 years to get it straightened out to World War II. Took a long time to get it straightened out. The issue is this: if they were successful in Wyoming, where most people have never seen our trees. We've got a lot of trees. We put I-80 through where there's no trees so that we wouldn't get a lot of immigrants. Not I. I'm not saying I. I'm saying E. From other states we will not mention. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But the point being is that we know what we've got, and so do the Chinese. Chinese are real quick on picking up on what they can survive on inside this environment, and they did, and they save their money. And it really bothers me how much money they stole. The United States government paid over $150,000. I don't want to say the number because it's a lie. If they paid the indemnity, that indemnity did not go to the compromise. In some cases, I think that in one instance, one individual walked off with $6,000. So didn't get that much. He got a little bit less than that. Paid enough to open a saloon, run for the mayor of Kimmer, which was a very costly endeavor at that time. He did run for the mayor of Kimmer and win, and actually had one up big debts inside that Sweetwater County. He would buy liquor. This is good fun. He'd buy liquor, and it was a long way to ship, and they probably couldn't send collectors. So they went to court to try to collect from him. It's a really interesting fellow. But the point being, a little bit nerdy fellow. But the point being is that the money was stolen from the Chinese to provide this day. So, okay. I think that's the last slide. I want to thank these people. I want to thank Robin. I cannot tell you how much I appreciated in privacy. Martin, Peter Lau, and Laura, and Ricky and Grace Leo, and on, for doing the translation for. It's a lot of heavy lifting. And these individuals all contributed to this, and so did their I'll open this up for questions. I talk next.
Were jobs like judges open to the Chinese at that time?
It really is a strange thing to me that I'll say was age ago. it says so in several different cases. That was restricted because of the citizen. Wyoming's a face-to-face place, and it's not. I let it go. It's never been crossed. So I think they let it go. He got citizenship for one another thing that I would even see his citizenship. But because it couldn't go, they weren't supposed to serve that juries. In their own community, they have a legal system for there were crimes, Chinese on Chinese. We have a couple of cases in archives where Chinese men killed other Chinese. They were tried through the court system and some incarcerated in character. So they were judged in the by the other.
We've got a question online. Let's see. Okay. And okay. Bob, do you have a question?
I do. Dudley, this is Bob
Oh,
Johnson.
Bob,
from-
you're still on mute. Could you unmute yourself?
I have unmuted myself.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Just a second, sorry. I think it's a operator error here. Bob, can you try that one more time?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Dudley, it's great to see you. This is Bob Johnson from your early days, undergraduate. It's great to see someone follow their passions and hear you talk passionately about the history of the Chinese in Western Wyoming. I have a question for you. I noticed you talked briefly about the Slovenian church there, and I assume that was either Catholic or Orthodox. I don't know. I couldn't tell. But can you talk about efforts to proselytize the Chinese and the pressures they faced? Can you speak to that in any kind of, with your data or your research and history?
Well, I think the proselytization didn't, I can't, it's not something that comes up very often. I mean, they had multiple different churches within Rock Springs. So the Catholic Church didn't try to proselytize them. Whatever the missionary group was inside of town probably did more, but I do not know what their affiliation was. I'm not sure what their affiliation was, and I need to do some more research on it. I know that his name was Reverend A. Smith. I'm even unsure of his initial, but it was Smith. And he had two ladies that accompanied him as part of the process, and they weren't quite, it was a Protestant group, but I'm not quite sure what that missionary school was run by. And that's something I'd like to get a hold of. If you ever find it, let me know. But the Catholic Church and the other groups, I don't know how heavily they tried to proselytize them. A few went to churches, I do know that. They were different churches. They didn't pick one church. They were converted to different faiths, not just.
You know, in the middle of the Mormon trek from Nauvoo to Salt Lake, I mean, what is the Mormon influence that you've picked up or detected there?
The Latter-day Saint Church, now this is a complicated thing that I'm going to tell you right now. And as much as I've read about it, number one is that because the church would not join the Union, they became the subject of Knights of Labor's tax. So in the case of Almy, the Knights of Labor drove out, according to different groups of Latter-day Saints. Also, that's not the case. Latter-day Saints came back to Rock Springs and came back to Almy. But they wouldn't join the Union because there was a basic policy not to join the Union at that particular period of time. Now, having said that, there is a real interesting thing. The person that Frederick A.B., the investigator for the Chinese consulate, and the colonel, he was a colonel, said about Isaiah Whitehouse is that he was a Latter-day Saint and he was the person that had attacked the Chinatown. The Deseret News was real quick to divorce himself from him. There were different Latter-day Saint sects, and I can't remember the sect that he belonged to. However, when he died in Yakima, Washington, it was showed that he had been baptized as a Latter-day Saint. He was baptized in Iowa. So it's kind of why I say it's a mixed bag of tricks. It's kind of hard to say that they proselytized because Isaiah Whitehouse attacked the Chinese. And he was a Latter-day Saint baptized in Iowa before he came to Wyoming. Isaiah Whitehouse also became, this is real funny that I'll say here, Isaiah Whitehouse also became a state legislature. Frederick A. Beebe, quoting from him again, said that the reason he became a state legislature is nobody read against him. Now, I could understand that. But the point being, he only served one term, did not run again. And so he was unable to run after the Chinese massacre. But he was Latter-day Saint. But again, that creates complexity and we understand proselytization or
Thank you, Bob. Do we have any more questions online? Oh. Benny, did you have a question for us? Benny?
Danny, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you, Penny.
Oh, sorry, I was talking, but I was still muted. So I'm here in North Carolina, and this is I'm just enjoying this fascinating talk you gave. And I remember doing a little bit of research for you back in the day when we were in grad school together. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, great. So I was fascinated by how you were able to correlate all of that different, those different sources, right? Like the census records and all of the other sources. And I'm a historian, we're historians, but I was wondering that maybe some of the non-historians or non-academics watching your wonderful presentation, they may not appreciate the skill and the expertise in putting all of that data together. And that's not even talking about gathering the data and the hours and hours finding the data. That's what we do as historians. But I wanted you to speak a little bit, if you can, to the audience about how you were able to kind of, you're thinking about putting the data together and to create a narrative for the public to kind of follow along.
So it's the hard part is that we've got a lot of information, but to make it synthesized and make the story is difficult. And when I wrote my dissertation in 2000, I finished it in 2000. Finished my dissertation in 2000 in census records. It has people's names. Now, people pronounce names differently. So let's say that my name was Leo Wong. Okay, just Leo Wing. That's a real name. There's a Leo Wing, right? And the person is like me, a little older, that's a census taker. And besides that, they don't really care. They might write it L-I-O. They might write it L-I-E-O. They might write it any way that they think it sounds, and they'll spell it that way, right? Now, my family, the heritage of my family is Scottish. They're Rosebrews married gardeners. The Rosebrews, they were displaced and brought to the New World. I had my cousin look to see how many different ways Rosebrew was spelled. And at least I saw at least 10 different ways it was spelled. And none of them like we spell it. Think about how that is with Chinese. The person tells them that their name is Liu Wing. And the person says Lo Wing and writes it down in the census record. To trace the census records is very difficult. Now, that piece of data is incomplete. And in 1890, the census record was burned in Washington, D.C., but not the tax records, the state archives. So the tax records in the state archives have these names. So you can take the names of the people in the 1880 census, the 1885 claim against the U.S. government, where there's 550 names, and this one is real good because they have translators, so the names are written out really well. Take the names inside the tax records, and you can trace these people. But that means opening up the assessor's book, and then open up the assessor's book and the tax.
The taxes.
The tax books. You've got to go through two books to be able to see it, because like if you saw the one that said Almy game, well, yeah, there's 15 people in that Almy game, but who are these people? We have to give them a name. They have meaning, and to give them flesh and blood, and to explain where they came from, where they went to, what happened to them. It takes a lot of work. And because people misenter people's names, because the fact that it was people that couldn't speak Chinese that were writing it was a very difficult thing to do. I have some people that hate census records, but I've since grown to like them, not for accurate rendition of the names, but because of the accurate rendition of numbers, and in some cases, occupation. So by using occupation, I can go back and check on the tax list and find out what it takes. So maybe Benny's question is how much time does it take? Hours and hours on the old reel, back before they put everything on microfilm, before they digitized it. Hours and hours of going through those things and saying, oh, no, I missed a whole year. Going back, researching the whole, on and on. It's a lot of work. And that's why it's taken me so long to get to the point. I've gotten the book in this book in a good form. It's going to take a lot of editing. I've got the book in a good form. It's not talking about, but I've got to make it so it's readable so that you won't be bored when you read it. But it's got to be truthful.
More questions? I think we can.
You mentioned that Central Pacific's mines were unsafe, so that they went to Rock Springs to work. Was the pay scale?
Yeah, it was like it is today. There was more work than there was people. So it was that kind of thing. Maybe a little bit more. And then when they had houses built in Rock Springs, it was better. The houses built by the Pacific. You saw them. They're a little bit similar to the Chinatown. Today was the first time I've ever seen the houses in Almy. So that's the first time they're not archives. It's the first time I saw them. So it was like, I need to be real clear on this. The Pacific mines were equally dangerous, but because of the fact that they didn't pay attention, because of the fact that they thought that they were operators, they really jumped back and forth. But the other thing too is the Union Pacific provided physical support. The Almy miners, they stayed in the state. They didn't go back to the West Coast, came to Rock Springs, and that was actually a big deal. They loaded them up on a train on the 4th of September. When they're taking to San Francisco, they took the train to Rock Springs. They could not open the mine without change. They said, here's a statement. Now this bothers me. Here's a statement. They said, but they're without clothes, without food, so what are they going to do? Now, they had done real well. In the mines, you work with no shirt. This is like that. It's so hot on the ground. And when they were chased out of the mines, they had no clothes. They burned the house. Where did they get clothes? The Pacific didn't have.
David, did you have a question?
Hey, Doug, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I was wondering, can you compare and contrast the coal miners with the railroad workers? Did you notice the same patterns in the section camps that you saw in the larger coal camps?
If you compare Aspen to Evanston food-wise, if you compare the material culture, the food sources and the type of items they're very similar. They have equally good diets. So I would ask Brian Kennedy if there's disagreement on that, but it looks like they've got just as good diets. What you've got with the Chinese workers on the railroad, though, they're not at a fixed point. For example, in Aspen, you need people to get the snow off the tracks in the winter. In the summertime, you might need them at Hampton. They're more fluidity, so they move more. So that would be a difference. They had to have like a rucksack or be ready to go. They were more mobile workforce than the was in coal mines. They were in one place. Now they would go because if we do, one of the people that I tracked, they went up to the Pacific Northwest. They went to Portland. They were at San Francisco and came back. So to the coal miners.
Looks like we've got two more questions here. We have Ricky Leo.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Hi, Dudley.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hey, Ricky, can you introduce yourself and tell that you were born in Rock Springs and now you're the president? Are you still the president of the Los Angeles Chinese Historical Society, or is it Los Angeles, or which one is it?
Yeah,
Hold on.
hold on a second.
That's Grace's wife.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you for inviting us to this presentation. It was very, very, very interesting and nice.
We have quite a few members from the Historical Society Southern California. There's Mike Jones on the line, and my friend Damien Chan used to live in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And that's us, my husband. We're the descendant of Leo in Rock Springs. We really appreciate that your presentation is so clearly just talk about the contribution of the Chinese community in Rock Springs, not to elaborate on the massacre, because I really appreciate that, because it's really important that the Chinese community recognize their contribution, all kind of work they've done, and still today they're still in Rock Springs, and a lot of more contribution that they will have. The Chinese people also saw World War II as well for the country. That's how they become a U.S. citizen. They were not allowed to be a U.S. citizen. That was one thing that I really want to emphasize for the audience out there, that if you are not knowing about that fact. So for your presentation, were very, very well done. And I'm really surprised all the things that you put together. I really didn't even know about it. So hopefully that we can work together sometime.
So Ricky, I'm gonna, if you'll jump in, Ricky's grandfather won the Purple Heart in World War II. He served for Rock Springs in
Yeah, World War I.
World War I. I'm sorry, World War I. Would you tell him a little bit about your grandfather, Ricky?
I don't know a lot about him. Maybe Grace knows a little more.
Yeah, his grandfather was working in a railroad. I don't know what perspective that how much he get involved. We didn't really know about it. We still try to research on it. And then he later on opened the Grand Cafe. And then my uncle, my grandfather would open the Grand Cafe. And that's when they did the farewell dinner for the World War worker went back to China. So later on, the restaurant got so busy, so they turned into a new Grand Cafe, which is across the street from the other side of the railroad. But Ricky's father is so World War II, and he actually got the Silver Star in the World War II, which not too many people know about it. Not too many Chinese people got a combat award during the time of the war. So that was a really, really high honor award for Chinese soldiers. So, someday we may be able to maybe present one of those awards back to Rock Springs, Wyoming.
So Ricky, I'm going to say something I didn't mention to the audience. National Park Service has said that Evanston and Rock Springs are eligible to be National Historic Landmarks. That doesn't mean that there's done. There's a lot of work, but it said it was eligible.
That's what.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Is there any interest in doing a commemoration of the massacre in Rock Springs, maybe in 2025?
Yes, there's a lot of interest. Is this Peter Lau?
This is Ricky.
Ricky, oh, Ricky, yeah, Ricky, there's a lot of interest in, and Laura Eaton has said that she wanted to celebrate it. I haven't been able to get back in touch with her, but I think that it would be a good thing to organize, because that would mark.
Yeah, we like to, I know Rock Springs, Wyoming never really invited the Chinese community in LA or around the world to the commendation. So I would like to help you with, a lot of people may be so interested in bringing back some of the, go back to honor some of those people that is at the past in Rock Springs, Wyoming, and their contribution.
Right. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know if you're familiar. We just immigrated to Wyoming from the formerly great state of Washington. We lived outside of Tacoma, and my wife is on the board for the Tacoma Chinese Reconciliation Project that commemorates and recognizes the massacre that occurred in Tacoma that you mentioned in November, the month after the one in Wyoming. And that project, they created a garden, a commemorative garden up in Tacoma. You might be able to contact those folks and get some sort of support for something similar here.
In Evanston, they built a Josh House, a replica Josh House. They put a pagoda to kind of commemorate, but we're trying to take further steps. And the six employees, we're working with them and with the school district to try to do some property set aside for this. So another question.
Was there another question online? I thought I saw another hand. Damie, do you have a question?
Yes, hello. Yes, Dr. Dudley. My name is Damie Chan. Originally, my maiden name is also Lu, or the Chinese character for Leo, for all of the Chinese that were in Rock Springs. Were you able to find, because my grandfather plus I think two other Chinese gentlemen opened the Sands Cafe in Rock Springs. And I think that was the first Chinese American restaurant in Rock Springs. I'm not sure if it was established before or around the same time as the New Grand. And I was wondering if you are able to maybe work with the Rock Springs City Council to kind of designate where the old Chinatown was in Rock Springs as a historical site?
Yes, we've designated as a historical site. So we're taking the next steps to make sure that's confirmed within the National Historic Landmark. And in terms of the oldest Chinese restaurant, there were some in the 19th century. Then the Grand Hotel on the north side was opened early on, and it became a real interesting thing. I think that where the Leos opened the Grand on the south side of the tracks, I think it's turn of the century. I've got that specifically, but I don't have it with me right now. But it's open turn of the century. Then it was changed, like Grace said, later on to become the New Grand. So the lineage there's a continual lineage up to when that closed. Then the Sands, I can't remember exactly when it opened, but there's also Lou's. Do you know Lou's restaurant there in Rock Springs? They're on Old US 30 or
Yes.
Yeah, I do remember that. That definitely opened up a lot later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was owned by
we were working in the Sands Cafe
yeah.
as well.
That was owned by Ricky's uncle. Ricky's uncle is the one that owned the Lou's Cafe, which was the partner with my uncle Richard and Ricky's dad, Sonny Leo, on the New Grand Cafe. So
right.
that opened much later, and since it opened much later, the Grand Cafe is all one of the oldest one, and they were really, really busy, and they would cater for the railroad worker and some of the tourists for Yellowstone. So, Dudley, I also want to let you know that Susan Dixon, she was a president of a Historical Society of Southern California, also online, listen to your lecture as well.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we should do something for the Sands also. And
yeah, we should do something.
Yeah.
Especially since it's still there.
Still.
Yeah. And open.
Is it still there?
Any other questions? That's it.
I think we're good.
Thank you all very much for coming. Next month, we have Sue Lopez and Cynthia Richmond on October 13th talking about Sabino Lopez from Farmer to Voice for Wyoming's Latin Americans. And then in November, we have firearms historian Evan Green talking about, he's going to do some of the firearms that are in the museum. Thank you very much for coming this evening. This was very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Gardner, for this, and thank all of you for joining us online. And we'll see you next month. Thanks.